Welcome back to Trailmakers with Fenrir. Since I recently passed the 4,000 hour mark in this game, I decided it was time to take another look at the evolution of my fighter planes. From my early noob stuff like this, to slick, logic-packed beauties like this. I've come a long way, and we're going to take a look at a good handful of them, but we'll be skipping hundreds of planes. So I don't mind if you skip the first half of the video or so, because most of them are going to be pretty basic from the early days. But if you want a good idea of where I came from, stick around for the whole thing. And either way, you should probably stick around for the later ones because they're pretty cool. They got a lot of stuff underneath the hood. But without further ado, let's get started. So starting us off, we had the earliest jet that I still have saved, the Kitten Jet Mark 5A Lunamoth. Now, it's about as simple as a plane can get. It's just a stick of thrusters with a bunch of wings slapped on it, some control surfaces, and then some guns glued on the front. Now, the weird wedges up here are just because, well, it's just a giant block of engines, so it needed a giant block of aerodynamics. And that's about all there is going for it to explain. In terms of handling, though, it actually does alright, which is one of the reasons why it's been saved for so long. It's got pretty good speed. Faster than my usual speed that I use nowadays. Goes about 500. But it does have a significant upward pitch. So, like, if I'm not touching the stick, it'll drift upwards pretty severely. But it does have good roll, and it even has yaw. But the Lunamoth, it's more than just outdated, it's ancient. So let's move on. The Mark 6 Wildcat is also pretty old, but it's the first plane that I have thrust vectoring on. Though it's very simple and weak, because it's just mini thrusters glued directly to the servos for the control surfaces. But that's the very start, the seed of my thrust vectoring, so it's important to show this one off too, I suppose. And we've got bigger yaw flaps this time, and they're able to separate them out into more of an air brake feature, though it was unintended, and I'm not sure if I ever actually used it that way back then. But nowadays I do something similar with logic, because it actually works pretty well to just spread the tail out. Now, flight characteristics of this plane are... I butchered that word, didn't I? The flight characteristics of this plane are pretty good. We've got decent roll. The pitch is kind of slow. And it has subpar yaw. And of course, it's still a pre-airborne build, so there's no auto-aim, just a bunch of tiny cannons. And there's not much more to say about the Wildcat. So let's move on. Now we're skipping the Mark 7 because there was never any Mark 7. I was an idiot and skipped that number on accident when I was building them. But this also comes with a significant improvement. Well, you can see it's actually got like a fuselage and everything to it. It's got some structure. It's not just a bunch of engines glued to a stick. And we have the same thrust vectoring going on again, though it does a little bit more on a smaller plane. And we also have some yaw thrusters on the wingtips. Some fixed in place yaw, which does very, very little. We've also switched to all mini thrusters, so we're nice and quiet. But the performance of this plane is pretty lackluster, especially at this point, relative to my current builds. It's not fast, it's not agile, it looks interesting, but not really good. And there is a little bit of special features to it. It technically has some cruise control, because you can separately toggle on 1/3 of the engines, 2/3 of the engines, or do both on for all the engines. And that was about as simple as logic gets, just throwing in an OR gate with some controls on it. But yeah, that's the Cat Bat. And I think we should move on to the Mark 9. Doink. So next up we have the Kitten Jet Mark 9A, the Curiosity. Now this one, you can see, has some auto-aiming weapons on here, so we've officially hit the airborne update. But other than that, we've got a very similar construction going on to the Cat Bat from before, except we've got doubled up yaw thrusters. We've got 2 thrusters per wing instead of just 1, which means we actually have a little bit of yaw force, as long as I can take off. It's not a whole lot, at least in forward flight mode, but it is plenty enough to balance itself out for the, what's it called, the Cobra maneuver, I think it is, where you stand straight up and down in the plane like this, with a nose to the sky. But you can probably hear that we've got the Dragon Jets in here. We've got a decent handful of them, so we've got more speed and more oomph in this plane. And yeah, we've got the same kind of cruise control, where it's just simple toggle some jets on, some jets off, I believe. Actually, no, wait. No, it's a percentage one. Never mind. So it toggles all of them on a little bit more, or all the way. And that's just from 2 separate toggle buttons. So, pretty simple. Let's move on. Next up we have the Mark 10A, the Jackal Cat, which is a very similar build again. The style hasn't changed too much over the last few generations of planes, but we did upgrade the thrust vectoring to Dragon Jets, so it actually does quite a bit more for us now, in terms of maneuvering. So let's get into the air. And you can see we have all right roll. The pitch is a little bit sluggish to get going, and then overcorrects itself, or overcompensates itself, and spins out a little bit. And then we have a little bit more yaw thrusters in the wings, but being that it's a bigger plane, it doesn't seem to have much of an impact from the last one. Still doesn't really lean the plane too much in either direction, but it is enough to balance itself out when it's facing straight up and down. So it's not worthless. But anyways, there's not really anything extra special about this plane. It does have the cruise control, though it doesn't have any indicator lights, it looks like. So yeah, another simple build, checked off the list. Let's move on. So I'm skipping the Mark 11A entirely and going straight to the Mark 11D, because this one was actually one of the top dogfighters of its era, unlike the more experimental 11A that just didn't quite work quite right. But anyways, one of the new features on this one is we have some pitch controls in the front. I always forget the name of it when you invert your pitch controls and have them ahead of your center of mass, but it adds a tremendous amount of maneuvering force, even if it's just a small little tail fin like this. So let's get flying it. so you can see how it performs in the air. And it's a little bit quicker to respond than the Mark 10A, as well as it doesn't spin itself out of control as easily. But beyond that, it performs very similarly. And there was a version of this that has an armored skin over the engines, which looks a little bit better, but it doesn't look too much better, so I'm not going to bother pulling it out. If it even still is around. I'm not sure if I have it saved anymore. But yeah, there's nothing else really noteworthy on this plane, so let's move on to the next versions. So up next we have the Mark 12A, which I can see is after the space update, because we have a bunch of the space thrusters on here. And they're still what I use for my thrust nowadays, because they're just, well, they got decent connection points, and they've got a good power to weight ratio, and they're space efficient, no pun intended. But it's very similar to design still. We've got the fixed wingtip thrusters instead of articulated yaw thrusters, though our vertical stabilizer is looking more and more like my modern one. This one just happens to be tilted, and when I fly it, I'm going to immediately remember why I never tilted them again, because even though it looks nicer, it changes the way that the yaw feels, and it in particular changes the way that the air brake feature works for me. Though nowadays I know how to wire it up with logic to make it reversed, it pitches it down instead of upwards, and I never really liked that. But as far as the performance of the plane goes, compared to the last one that I showed, this has much better yaw, or much better roll. I mean, the yaw is better too. And the pitch control is also quite a bit better, because our forward control surfaces are much bigger with the simple tail fin instead of the small tail fin. And at this point we've reached my standard kit, where it's 6 smart cannons and 2 rockets, which I started using as my typical weapons kit for quite a long time. It's still what I have as my maximum kit, but nowadays I have logic that, well, we'll get to that later. I don't want to skip too far ahead. We're still on a middle-of-the-road plane here. Anyways, let's move on. Next we have Kittenjet Mark 12S, which is one of my earlier piston glitch planes. Well, maybe not one of the earlier ones. There were some definitely much earlier experimental ones, but this is the first one that follows my more modern formula, where I give it an entire second fuselage, a second set of wings, and sink the weapons down to the nose. But other than that, our layout hasn't changed too much from the 12A. We still have the wingtip thrusters. We still have the pitch and roll on matching servos here in the back. And yeah, they put it into build, or pull it out of build mode, and take to the skies. This one has very nice roll. Okay pitch control. And we've got decent yaw. This is also the first of my planes that has an accumulator-based cruise control, where you can raise and lower the value on the accumulator to lock in a certain amount of thrust. And that's what those colored lights on the wingtips are. But aside from being a little bit better performance, and generally more streamlined than the last few, there's not much more to say about this plane. So we're going to move on to the Mark 13. So for the Mark 13A, you can see where Piston glitched again. And I can see some inefficiencies riddling it. But this one has pistons in the front, middle, and back. And I said that backwards, but whatever. And that's because this one took quite a bit more work to stabilize in order to make this entire top section all one weld group and sink into this weld group. But other than that, we've only got a couple more quirks. And I should keep it in build mode here, it'll be easy to show. We have some articulated yaw for once. We have it on separate servos here on the tail. But because it wasn't the most effective, we also still have the wingtip thrusters from our earlier designs on here. But combined together, that gives us a pretty good amount of yaw force. You can see them in action. They do clatter against each other a little bit, but not too badly. And if we get into the air, you can see that we actually have a decent amount of yaw force. So this plane itself does fly pretty sloppily. It has good roll, decent pitch, and we just saw the yaw. And in addition to the standard kit, we have some backwards facing guns and some bomb bays, which... Let's see, there's the bomb bay. Well, we have a bomb bay. But hey, it's something. And we still have the accumulator-based cruise control. That'll be showing up on a whole bunch of other builds. And we have the meow sound effect, which I think one or two of the previous planes might have had as well, but I didn't show it. It becomes a standard feature on all of my planes to have my fighter jets meow, because I'm weird like that. But it's funny, so it's all good. Anyways, I believe that's all for this plane. So let's move on to the next one, because that one's a pretty good one. Now the Mark 13M is an all-star of mine because with slight modifications over the last year or so since I made it, it's still in my transform slot today. Well, actually now that I'm looking at it, quite a lot of changes, but that makes sense. Because we're currently on version 17, and this is just version 1. But we'll get to those ones a little bit later. We'll take some pit stops at other versions of the 13M. In the meantime, let's fly this one, so you can see why it became my top dogfighter of its era. We have nice, responsive roll, because we don't have those wingtip thrusters anymore. We have the yaw directly integrated onto our servos and the tail there. It's a little hard to see it in flight, but they're on large hinges attached directly to the servo, so that little nugget that makes up the thruster can tilt outwards to the side. And that's the basis for my thrust vectoring from here on out. Although the actual physical construction changes a little bit here and there, it's more or less the same. As well as our vertical stabilizer design is something that's kind of almost, I would say, locked in at this point. I've got that style and then like one other style that I build nowadays. But we're looking closer and closer to my, what I would call my modern style of fighter jets. But anyways, there's nothing more about this particular version that we haven't covered already, so let's move on. Doink. Oh darn. Whatever. Next we have the Mark 14B, mostly just because it's prettier than the Mark 14A, being that it's a 3-wide instead of a 2-wide cockpit. And the other notable feature that makes it look a little bit more like a proper fighter jet is we have pitch and roll combined under the same servo instead of having those matching kind of mirrored servos, or duplicated servos. And to make up for that, we have 2 thrusters attached to it. And now in build mode, I can zoom in a little bit on the yaw mechanism I was mentioning. Though it is done a little bit differently, this is more like my modern style. And we're starting to get the logic in here. We have logic support for our thrust vectoring for low-speed maneuvering. So that even if we're not at full forward thrust, when we're doing a turn, pitch or roll, we can still get a bunch more thrust out of this. And when we take to the sky, you'll see how that plays into effect. So we can spin for our little playful maneuvers a lot easier. We have a lot more control over the aircraft. It has good yaw, pretty good roll, pretty good pitch. And one thing that I didn't show in build mode that my eye just caught, but YouTube's compression isn't going to let you see, is that it has a little sheet of armor on the back. It's just a 3x3 square panels, but it's right over the spot that was getting hit the most, and there's a critical piston underneath of there, which when it was broken would make the piston glitch explode, so the armor was very necessary there. But I believe... oh, yeah. We no longer have the accumulator for the whatchamacallit, the cruise control. We have flares and chaff and smoke trails. Just some decorative bells and whistles. Well, let's move on to the next one, because that one's a pretty nice one. Oh, and this one has a proper air brake, where when you spread the yaw in both directions, it turns off the yaw thrusters, so it can actually, you know, not cancel out its own job, like the earlier versions did. Next we have the Mark 14I2, which marks a couple of things. It's the first plane on the list that's still in my regular save slots instead of my archived gallery stuff. It's the first VTOL that I have on the list, because it's the first good VTOL that I made that doesn't use gyros or gyro stabilizers at all. And it's one of the first planes that I started giving nicknames to again. I think I mentioned that. It's the Cheshire. Like the Cheshire Cat. Because the Cheshire Cat just kind of floats around, and so does a VTOL jet. And as you can see, it's pretty well balanced. It's a little bit nose heavy, but only by a whisker. That's why, if you saw in build mode here, there's a random set of pistons on the back, and they're there especially for weight. I just need like that 12 or 13 kilograms extra in the rear, and that did it just fine. Sometimes random blocks in random places are just what you need. And then this little bit of logic here is an extra circuit that when we're in VTOL mode just turns off the forward thrust ability of these jets here, so that we don't drift forward when we don't want to. Oh, let's take off VTOL. Other than that, we just have some bells and whistles. We have the flares and the fireworks chaff. And as far as performance goes, it has pretty good roll, decent pitch, although a little bit sluggish, and we've got good yaw. So all in all, this was a wonderful plane, and it lived in my transform slot for quite a while until I finally built better VTOLs. And even then, they're only better because they have got better features. this one's still one of the more well-balanced of them. Now, like I mentioned before, the Mark 13M has undergone a lot of revisions, and this is the Mark 13M10, the Midnight. It's got a lot of extra things going for it. We've got the bells and whistles expanded, obviously. The thrust vectoring is pretty much the same, except that it got the logic support. We have a sheet of armor paneling over the thrusters here that, once the piston glitch collapses, lays underneath this top skin, as well as a couple of less essential panels here, which is why I used the bigger ones. Just slap them on there. And yeah, let's give it a quick fly. If I can adequately take off, which I can't. So yeah, let's give it a quick fly. And we've got that good roll. We've got good pitch control. And we've got good yaw. Now this particular version is still my transform slot right now, because it's like my my production model of plane. It's not too good, not too bad. It's like, it's a high average. So I give it out to people a lot, and one of the reasons I do that is because it's perfectly balanced. So when you let go of the controls, it doesn't really drift up or down at all. Well, with this version it's drifting up ever so slightly, but that's just because of the armor, I think. Maybe it's the... No, this is the right road. This is the version that I've got in my transform slot still. Maybe I've just modified that a little bit more since I saved this copy. Being that the transform slot doesn't always update the original build. But anyways, this is still a fairly simple model. There's no crazy logic or anything going on it. It's just got good functionality all around. It's good for formation flights and dogfighting alike. And it's the one that I give out to people the most because it's good while still being pretty straightforward. And yeah, I think that's all there is to say about this model, so let's move on. Next up, we have the Mark 15A, which is one of my highest power core planes, coming in at a whopping 190, and that's because I borrowed someone else's design for thruster layout in this version, and did a zigzag pattern instead of my normal rows. So it's about almost twice as thruster dense as pretty much all my other planes, which makes it a little bit boxy and lumpy looking. And then we also have doubled up rockets here that run on logic, so that with one button press, it fires one set of rockets, then on the next press, it fires the second set. So you can fire them back to back with two presses of the same button, or stagger them as much as you want, or just use one to save it for later. But yeah, let's give it a fly. You might have noticed we have the separate servos for pitch and roll, but we still have the thrusters doubled up, which gives us a tremendous amount of maneuvering force, which I thought would be necessary for a plane with so many extra thrusters that weighs more. But in reality, it actually gives it a little bit too much control. It kind of makes it feel like the plane is a little bit drunk because you oversteer very easily. Additionally, it likes to both pitch up and pitch down on its own. After pitching up at all, it'll continue to drift as if it has a pitch up trend. But if you leave it level, it'll drift downwards. So it's kind of kind of a piece of junk to actually fly, but I wanted to show it off anyways, just because, well, it's the first one that had the double rockets, and it had the interesting thruster bay. But let's move on to something that actually works good. And next up we have the Mark 14D2 Black Cat, which is one of my most high-powered thrust vectoring setups. It's got pitch and roll on the same set of servos, but we have 3 thrusters per servo now, with an extra set piston glitched in. And we also have a lot more armor than previous versions. We have an armor on the top layer, as well as that underlayer that sits underneath the skin, spread out over the entire layer of the underside. We even have some armor over the servos in the front here, because those are very critical. When I lose one of the servos or the simple tail fin attached to it, it becomes a lot harder to control this machine. But if we get to flying it, I can show off one of the special features, because the original Mark 14D suffered from something of oversteering, similar to the last model that I just showed. So in order to... yeah, I'll show it in regular mode first. So in order to correct stuff like this, that makes it seem like it's full of gyros, I promise it's not. Gyros are disgusting in planes. But I added a low maneuvering mode, which is a logic-driven system that limits the articulation of all the servos by 50%. So it makes it much more controllable, much easier to do fine maneuvers without spinning out or oversteering. And I expand on this idea over the next couple of models, as you'll see, but this is the first one that I pulled it off on. Well, pulled it off makes it sound like it's that much more complicated logic, it's just that I hadn't had the idea yet. The logic itself wasn't that hard to figure out, once I actually had the idea of what I wanted to make. So always think outside the box. If you've got problems in your planes, you might just need a creative solution. But let's move on, because the next planes just keep getting more interesting and more logic-filled from here. Guess what's back? It's the Mark 13M. This one's the Mark 13M12, the Twilight, which, as you might be able to tell, is zero-dragged. And it's fully zero-dragged. There's only a couple insignificant spots of drag left on it. And yeah, it also has the low maneuvering mode, which was extremely necessary for the control in this one, considering at high speeds, aerodynamic controls and thrust vectoring both tend to spin yourself out really badly. So, here, let me get up to supersonic speeds and show you what I mean. Okay, so if I'm in normal mode and go to roll, it's kind of uncontrollable, unpredictable roll, and I also lost about 300 or 400 miles an hour of speed just with that little spin. So if you click on the low maneuvering mode and limit your control by 50%, you can much more gracefully and predictably control yourself, as well as not losing nearly as much speed in the maneuver. Extremely helpful for zero-dragged planes. It also makes it feel a little bit more natural, as if there's more air resistance on your control surfaces, which I'm pretty sure you can do with the damping controls now, but I haven't really messed with that at all since it came out. But anyways, it's pretty much a straightforward version of a plane that I've already showed off twice, so you know its performance at lower speeds. I showed the high speed performance. Let's move on. Oh, let me pull the air brake. I was gonna just smash into the deck, but I decided not to. Doink. smooth. Next we have the Mark 15 B3 Sunrise, which is my best VTOL currently. It's got a lot of armor on it. It's got all sorts of logic systems in it. We have multiple maneuvering modes. Obviously we've got the VTOL mode, but we also have the maneuvering mode on and off, and we have a firing system. So we can toggle, we start with all 3 guns on in the orange setting. When we set it to green, only 2 of the guns, or 2 pairs of the guns will be active, and when we set it to blue, only 1 pair will be active. And that's on a multi-toggle, so it's only 1 button press to cycle through those 3 options, which was a nifty little piece of logic that I've recently figured out. Well, not necessarily recently, but recent to this plane. And yeah, it also has those doubled up rockets with their logic system in it. So if I crack this open and say, those are NOR gates. Where's a good logic gate to grab? OR gates. There should be a bunch of them in here. Yeah, judging by the lag when I grabbed them, there's a... Yeah, that's just the OR gates. If I can find an AND gate, that'd be splendid. Take off that panel, there's an AND gate. There's a good chunk more of the logic. So let's grab a non-dissected version of the plane and fly it around a little bit. So we'll click it into VTOL mode, in low maneuvering mode, and when I take off, you'll see that we rise pretty straight up and down. We're a little bit tail heavy when we're rising, and a little bit nose heavy when we're floating, just because the center of thrust and the center of mass aren't perfectly aligned. But it's a 700 complexity build, so... I mean, a lot of that's actually armor, so I can't use that as an excuse. Never mind. But anyways, its flight characteristics are pretty darn good. In forward flight anyways, we've got a little bit of nose down tendency, but not too much. Nothing we can't correct for. We've got good roll. We've got good pitch. And we've got good yaw. And this is all with the low maneuvering mode on. If we switch to high maneuvering mode, we have quite good roll. Let's get a little bit above the surface of the water to show off that we've got some pretty significant pitch control. And we've got a lot of yaw force. So the low maneuvering mode helps rein all that in when it's not needed. And then I don't think I actually fired the guns, but you know what gunfire looks like. We've got all 6 smart cannons, just 4 smart cannons, or only 2. And anyways, let's move on. Just a brief look at the most recent version of the Mark 13M, the M17. It's got the most significant armor scheme. It even has some of the non-modular wing panel parts of the wings. And yeah, it's just a slightly tweaked version of the earlier ones. And I just wanted to briefly show it off just because, well, it completes the set. I don't know much more ways that I can... I actually know one more way I can modify it, but that's minuscule. It's pretty much in the final form that the Mark 13M is going to take, I think. But anyways, I'm not even going to bother flying it. I'm just going to mention that it flies about 40 miles an hour slower than the other ones because of the extra armor. and the weight and drag of it. Now I'm sure the video is running long at this point, but bear with me, it's almost at the end. We're at the second to last. This is the Mark 15C Night Sprite. And this was the first plane that I built specifically to house all the logic in it. It has 3 maneuvering modes. We start off in low maneuvering mode, then switch to medium and then high, and then we've got 2 fire modes, because we only have 2 pairs of smart cannons instead of 3. But all the other planes were retrofitted to have their logic in it. This one started off with it. One of the only other new features is that little seemingly decorative piece at the end of the thrusters, which is actually a little bit of armor to cover it up. Each of those pieces only has 4 bullet health, of course, and they're only connected by a single point, but that's still enough to soak up a couple of bullets to protect the crucial thrusters. So in low maneuvering mode, you can see that we've got a decent amount of maneuvering. The roll is a little slow, but we've got good pitch. And the yaw is okay too. We click it up 1 notch to the medium maneuvering mode. The yaw is better. The roll is sharper. And the pitch is even tighter. Then when we click it up to the final maneuvering mode, we have gyro levels of pitch control, tremendous amount of yaw, and a pretty good amount of roll. Although it's a little bit sloppy and drunk. There we go. Good amount of roll. And I believe that's all there is to say about this plane, because we've already covered the details of all these systems. We're just going to move on to the final entry, the cream of the crop. And finally we had the Mark 14 D7 Black Cat, which has all those systems and a little bit extra. Because this one is variable maneuvering mode, which means instead of having a couple of set modes, we can change in an analog fashion what our maximum angle is. So right now, I'm just increasing the maximum angle. I'm holding the stick all the way down, and you can see the lights are changing on a gradient as well. And no matter what we have it set to, we have the full range of motion under control. It doesn't skip anything. So it uses a couple of multiplication gates and things like that going on in order to do that. But other than that, we have the 3 firing modes, because we've got 3 pairs of smart cannons going on. The armoring is good because we took out the flares, which I realized are 3 complexity apiece, so that bought me 24 more pieces of armor. Pretty much finished up protecting all the vulnerable sections. And also, though I'm not going to bother ripping it out and showing it off, the logic system to actually do this variable maneuvering mode is quite a few blocks smaller, which means there's a lot less points in the build where losing a single logic block can knock out your ability to control the plane. So between that and the extra armor, its survivability is quite a bit up. But the physical performance of the plane is pretty much unchanged from the previous version I showed. At 20% capacity, our least amount of capacity, we still have pretty adequate amounts of control. The yaw is a little bit lacking, but we've got good pitch, and we've got good roll. It's a little slow, but it matches the pitch control as well. For combat, I switched it up to at least yellow instead of red where it starts off. And that buys us quite a little bit more maneuvering force. But yellow is only about 40 to 45% of our capacity. When we bring it all the way up to purple, the plane is drunk. It's very sloppy to fly it, but you have all the maneuvering force in the world to get pointed in generally whichever direction you want, and then you can reduce the maneuvering force back down to more finely control it and stay on course. So I'm still fine-tuning exactly how fast the accumulator changes in order to ramp up or ramp down our maneuvering force, but that's just fine-tuning. But with this, I believe we've finished off the video. If you stuck around for the whole thing, thank you very much. And if you want to support the channel, leave a comment, like, and subscribe. All that good YouTube stuff, you know. Anyways, that's about all. Bye-bye now.
PlayStation